Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second in our series of LinkedIn Live. I'm Bhushan Sethi, the co-leader for People in Organization here at PwC. My co-host Pete Brown is enjoying a long-deserved vacation, so he's not here. He'll be back in September. Delighted to be joined by Chaitali Mukherjee, who runs our People in Organization practice in India. Chaitali, exciting times for India. Gold medal in the javelin and a record Olympic performance. How are you today?
Amazing, Bhushan. Thank you so much. And yeah, we are on cloud nine to say the least. It's in 100 years of athletics that we have got back to gold. And as they say, once you win, you keep winning.
Let's
Uh,
hope. Let's hope.
fingers crossed.
So, as you and I have both had the pleasure of working in multiple continents. You happen to be in India now. I happen to be in New York. We've seen this topic of leadership really evolve over our careers. I remember in the late 90s and the early 2000s when organizations started to get very global and establish shared services and be comfortable with outsourcing. They had to think about this topic of what does it mean to lead globally? How do I fly around places? How do I make sure I'm running my business, but also building relationships with different teams across different national cultures? And geography was such an important piece. What we'd like to do over the next 15 to 20 minutes is take you on a journey to maybe dispel a few myths around global leadership. Our perspective is it's no longer just about physical place. It's about really managing and understanding your people and understanding different behavioral traits. And those people could be in Denver or they could be in Delhi, but they could be binded by some similar traits and different personas. So we'd like to really talk about the role of geography, understand the historical context, and say, what does the new model of leadership look like? And so bringing different examples from both the East and the West is really what we're focused on. So Chitali, the leadership model of today, your thoughts?
So, Bhushan, leadership is the most talked about thing for I don't know how many years, if not generations. And yet, it's the biggest problem that remains unsolved. Because every time people think they crack the leadership code, something new comes up. Earlier, there was the whole context of which generation of leadership are you? Then it was which part of the world as a leader are you? And now it is where are you working? And in fact, I think the last 18 months have taught us some very interesting things. It has taught us leadership is no more about a place, leadership is no more about a generation, and leadership is no more about East or West. Leadership is simply put about persona. Everybody reacts differently. You and I, we have gone around the world. I've personally worked across 21 countries, and I know this for a fact. At the heart, at the base of it, we all want same things. And what I want or what you want could actually have very different motivations coming from what we have experienced in our lives. So, right at the center of leadership expectation globally is actually our own motivations, and hence leadership is as global yet as local as it can be. So, that's
Yeah.
what I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's some classic traits of leadership that are still relevant, 30 years later in terms of setting good visions, being vulnerable, being empathetic, empowering people. I think the last few years have really taught us that having a global mindset and a knowledge of different cultures and different demographics is critical. And then obviously the pandemic has shown us that you can't go it alone, and surrounding yourselves by lots of different experts across different areas from economics to health to supply chain, whatever you're leading is also critical. What have you observed in terms of some of the new behaviors?
So, Bhushan, it's been quite amazing, right? At the end of the day, we are seeing today people are seeking leaders who have a perspective not about what's happening just where they live. They are also seeking leaders who have a perspective of what's happening globally. Earlier, it perhaps was okay for you to know your subject. Today, that's necessary but not sufficient. Your perspective about what's happening across the globe has become that much more important. So one thing is being global yet being local. And that's the way I look at it as one very important leadership capability. The second one, which I think pandemic taught us actually. Earlier, we were very keen for leaders to be in a certain place, and everybody worked around the leader's time or the locational time zone. You would know it, Bhushan. In India, we've had so many zones working that people actually didn't know which time zone they're working. But now I think when everybody took offices to their homes, it's no longer okay for you to work different time zones. Also, location just doesn't matter anymore. So I think that's again a very important perspective for a leader. Can I walk the mile and actually think from the perspective of where the people are rather than people walking that mile and working around? And time zone is just a display, it's a surrogate for the expectation that's changing.
So I think what you're saying, Chaitali, is one of the leadership skills now is, can you re-engineer conventional work? So can you redesign work, and if it's no longer about a 9 to 5 in Denver, why should the same people have to work, 7 till 3 a.m. in Bangalore? If we can redesign work and make it asynchronous, we can actually give everyone back the currency of flexibility and time, and they can kind of work in different ways. From my perspective, though, that is a mile. That is one of the last miles that needs to be run, and it's one of the hardest miles, because through the pandemic, I think there's been a lot of good stories of empathy and surrounding ourselves by experts and kind of servant leadership. But the ability to redesign work, some of which has to be in a physical location and use different technology, is a tough one. It's much harder than just working from home and conducting Zoom calls.
So, Bhushan, I think one of the other very difficult ones, which perhaps could also be an impediment, is leaders believing that they have to have all the answers. Vulnerability is grossly underrated. Today, the leaders need to know it and yet not have all the answers. And how is the leader able to bring himself or herself all out and stand up and say, I just don't know this? Part of that whole where is the work and where is the workforce is also coming from there. Because the fact is, nobody has an answer. If there's one thing the pandemic has taught, just when we think it has become predictable because of data, it takes a different turn. And around that, each time, the leaders being able to stand up and being very vulnerable, authentic, and saying, I don't know. So we'll take it bit by bit. And when we are taking it bit by bit, is it just a transaction of what I think, or it's a transaction of what we think? I think that becomes very important, because with vulnerability comes the need to make it a two-way transaction.
Yeah, and that vulnerability can be shown, like we said, it can be remote, it can be geographical. If we look a couple of years ahead, I think it's important to highlight that we're not saying everyone's going to be a remote leader. We're still saying that, certain global leaders are going to have to travel around and meet people, whether it's in their community, in their city, or in different continents. But I think we're highlighting that it doesn't have to be the only way. The whole adage of management by walking around, there's a lot of walking you can do virtually, and we are craving physical connection, and we need to see leaders, but it's not the only model. I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah, I think, Bhushan, it's going to be very difficult to manage everything remotely. Human being is a social animal, and that being part of a social setup, and particularly driving innovation, driving thought process together, is a very important part of what we do, how we do. But yet, as leaders, we will have to take cognizance of the fact that just because it could work for you and me, it will work for everyone may not be the answer. And I think at the center of it is going to be highly personalized experience. And I think it's easier said than done again. But the reality is that there are going to be no two individuals or two employees who are going to seek exactly the same thing from the leaders. Even if they're seeking similar things, their motivations may be different, and hence the experience will have to be different. So I think the leader's ability to personalize it real time is again a huge ask that they are having from the leaders. We all are having from our leaders as well.
Yeah. And that personalization really starts with saying, how do I segment people based on different needs or different common behavioral traits? So it could be, a millennial in, like we said before, Mumbai and Manchester have kind of similar behavioral traits and similar perspectives, and maybe wanting to be led and managed and influenced in the same way. And so whether it's personalizing around kind of around demographics or generations or national cultures, I think that's really important. Inclusive leadership is something we are all talking about around the world. It obviously links very specifically around diversity and inclusion. How do you manage remote work inequity? It's a big challenge for lots of leaders to say, what does that really mean for me?
Yeah, and I think when we are having these conversations with a lot of leaders, if all of us are going through that journey of, is there a straight answer to this? And the answer is there isn't a straight answer. With different cohorts of people, we are going to have very different outcomes. Yet, the cardinal truth in terms of what people are seeking from leaders are remaining those basic things. Just tell me the way it is, be authentic, take me along, and most importantly, listen. And I think that becomes a very, very important one that at least we are seeing is going to be very important. In India, I can tell you, Bhushan, it is quite interesting. Employees have taken work home like everywhere else, but the workspaces that we have taken inside our homes are not as big because our homes are not that big. And hence, the ask of organizations has been to just understand and tolerate. The whole aspect of resilience and tolerance around how employees are walking that extra mile is going to be a big one. Earlier, we used to have constraints around what is doable, what is not doable. Now you can't do it anymore. And I think that whole definition of what is possible is getting stretched in a big, big way.
Yeah, and
How do you
part of
see
that,
it in your place?
yeah, and part of what's possible is also going to be different in different industries. So if I'm in a factory manufacturing, I need to play a really strong role being kind of helping and coaching and helping people kind of more as an apprentice model, showing and helping them do. If I'm running a trading desk in a big bank, it may be a different style of leadership. So there's going to be some things that are common and some things that are going to be kind of different. And we haven't really talked about it, but the role of the leader as a coach, to help and also encourage learning amongst their teams in all industries is going to be a critical aspect of this.
And one of the things that does come to my mind, Bhushan, as we think about it, is leaders are very lonely right now. So, one of the big asks from leaders is to look around fellow leaders and just have a conversation around what's working for one and what's not working for the other. Because we all are suddenly, as leaders, being expected to know it all, do it all, and it does get lonely. So I also believe one of the big asks as part of the whole global leadership template is: are you looking around for yourself and for others around you? If I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of my teams, and I think that's a big one again.
Yeah, it comes back to the investing, seeing well-being as important, and the leader needs to kind of take care of that in their people, but themselves also. And again, if you worked in healthcare over the last 18 months, you'll be feeling that trauma a lot differently to say if you're working from home in the tech sector. I think that's a really important trait of kind of how leaders do need to show up for their people. So Chaitali, as we think about kind of running this to the end, globally, we've been always thinking about Western teams running global teams, maybe huge infrastructure teams in, say, India or kind of other parts of the world. We know that's different now. We know we have significant critical mass and significant number of leaders in places like India managing kind of Western-based teams. Any thoughts there for the audience from a personal perspective?
So, Bhushan, when I was running 13 markets sitting out of East, some of the markets were Europe. And very interestingly, it's your own bias that you have to fight first, starting off. Because other biases can be managed only after you manage your own bias. So that's, I think, principally it starts from there. How do you feel about that whole equation changing? Because you won't get too many examples. So, number one, how do you manage that equation for yourself? Number two, it's okay to not know. And it's okay to feel out of depth and go and seek support. And third, I think now there are enough and more examples, but there will always be a first time for something or the other. How do you handle that first time situation and take it along? I think, and we are going to see a lot more of those examples as locations, no more matter. And what actually matters is going to be caliber and availability, right, of talent. I think a lot of these equations will come up. Everybody will have to find out how they are dealing with it, first at their own level and then how they're dealing it with their teams.
Yeah. And maybe with bias comes, you got to have the courage to kind of look at yourself in the mirror to say, how do I think about this differently? Like here in the US, we have a lot of challenges with things like systemic racism, and do we like the word equity, and kind of critical race theory. But sometimes leaders have to kind of raise up and say, I'm going to do what's right for my organization, for my community, for my clients, for my suppliers, and kind of and call out this and challenge the status quo, and call out people, including in their own organizations. We see that in the workplace, we see that in society, and these things are kind of heavily interlinked. So, Chaitali, any closing thoughts? I know we've talked about kind of the roles of leadership, what we can learn from history. This isn't a new topic. We've talked about the role of geography maybe being less relevant in the future, and the need to kind of think about different personas. Any closing thoughts?
So, 4 points come to my mind. Number one, earlier it was all about leaders being global. Now it's about being hyper global. You need to know the global, but you need to know the local even well, because you'll have to connect the dots. That's number one. Number two, I think the leader's ability to seek help, to be vulnerable, is going to be a very important one. Number three, the leader has to learn to walk a mile, be adaptable, because you do not know anymore as global leaders what's the circumstance under which your global team is operating. It would be, and it could be different from what you're doing. And number four, I think this is very, very important, I believe. It's not going to be okay anymore for a leader to not speak up for something that they believe is important. So it's no more about just being politically correct. It is going to be very important for leaders to have a view and put that on the table, because everybody's watching. So these four things, according to me, Bhushan, if I had to say archetype of a global leader, these four, they would make the cut.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our audience to highlight that when we talk about leader, it's in its broadest sense. It could be an executive, it could be a supervisor of 3 people. It goes across industries and ages. And for those of you who are listening and watching in who are not in leadership positions, really knowing that this is where your managers and leaders actually want to and need to be. They need to kind of understand inclusion. They need to understand re-architecting work. They need to invest in your learning and their own learning, as well as their own well-being. As we know, Chaitali, in the great resignation, as it's been termed, and with tight talent markets across the world in many areas, people still join companies and leave leaders. That's some of the biggest challenges around kind of disengagement and kind of change, a loss of morale in organizations. So thank you, Chaitali. It was a great conversation. Really appreciated that global and East-West perspective. Please do join us for our next LinkedIn Live series in September, where my partner, the head of our P&O practice in Europe, Petra Raspels, will be joining Pete Brown and I. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.